Moshe, we go way back, a lot of history together. If you're not familiar with Moshe Ferber, he is the chairman of the Cloud Security Alliance in Israel, but that's not all that he does. Um, so before anything else, Moshe mentioned it, and we'll mention it later on as well. As the leader of the CSA in Israel, he is responsible for lots of documentation, lots of interesting stuff, and working groups about cloud security. Uh, so if you ever want to participate, whether by reading or by even contributing, feel free to reach out to him. And again, without further ado, Moshe, I think we are going to be educated by your presentation. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So first of all, Gidi and Lior, thank you for inviting me. Gidi, thank you for hosting this and steering through all the slides and questions. And Tal and Ofer, pleasure to cooperate with you on this session and learn more about Reco. Gidi, I'm not sure I'm able to. Yeah, okay. Moving my slides. So what I'm going to drill down here is the foundation of cloud monitoring. And more specifically, let me introduce myself. Then I'm going to talk about Cloud Security Alliance, and then I'm going to explain what I'm going to talk about. Regarding myself, financial security for over 20 years. I think we're getting through the 25th year by now. In the let's focus on the last 10 years. I've been joining the Cloud Security Alliance, I think, give or take in 2010, something like that, really early in the market adoption of cloud. And I had the privileges of seeing this organization grow and participated in most of the, creating most of the research, not most of that, but big chunk of the certification and research in the Cloud Security Alliance. And I'm happy to talk to you about cloud security also today. Those of you who are not familiar with the Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Security Alliance is a nonprofit organization. It is built from different community of volunteers around the world, like the one that I have in Israel, the Israeli chapter. But there are over 50 different countries, over 100 different chapters, and many contributors who help the CSA produce best practices. For instance, Tal is part of the AI working group. This is the newest working group for the Cloud Security Alliance. AI is very important for the CSA. First of all, most AI workloads run on cloud computing, makes a lot of sense. Also, it changed the way that we do security, it changed the way that we compute, changed the way that we handle different cloud services. So this is why we are heavily invested on AI. Here in the Israeli chapter, we are building a lot of research ourselves. Here you can see the last 4 publications that we are released. This is done internally in the chapter. Those of you who wish to participate, ping me, direct message me, or even Gidi. Gidi was also part of some of these research papers. And today, by the way, we're working on Cloud Security for Startups version 2. We released the first document about 5 years ago. It helped many startups to build their security. The nice thing about this document that it's describe how you build security into your SaaS based on the different rounds of finance, because this is why startup is different from enterprises. They cannot do everything on the first day. So they have to adapt the maturity of their security based on the money that they have and the customers that they have. And now we're working on the second version of this document. Help is always required. Let's jump in. What am I going to talk about? I'm going to dive into monitoring cloud services. I'm going to start from the left, talking about traditional CSPM that was already mentioned, that stuff that are more into infrastructure and platform as a service. But as we move through the different monitoring tools, I'm going to move more and more into software as a service, which is the topic of this discussion today. And I'm going to give some example of desired SaaS architecture, both for monitoring and also for operational concerns. Just to make sure that we understand the different terminology. So in cloud computing, we have the services that we build our own software on top of them, or we bring our own software. This is infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. You probably encountered with Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure. Those are all infrastructure and platform as a service, and they required mostly different tools than software as a service. What is software as a service? Somebody else build an application and we consume it. So infrastructure as a service, we build our own application. In software as a service, somebody else built the application, we consume it. What is the difference? Well, the shared responsibility is different in IaaS, and SaaS. In SaaS, most of the responsibility is on the provider, but there is something else that is different. Software as a service, there are many vendors. Almost all software companies today is a software as a service company. And there's a big variety in the market. Some of those providers are very big. They understand cloud. They invest heavily in the SaaS offering. And some of those providers are smaller companies, only doing one niche software, and they don't really understand how to do security well. So an infrastructure as a service and platform as a service usually have one vendor inside the organization, maybe two vendors, but it's usually limited number of vendors, and they're usually very big. Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, those type of vendors. In software as a service, organization will have a lot of different services, and some of them would be from the giants, some of them will be smaller companies, medium-sized companies. So the evaluating the service and the security of it is very different by nature. After all this opening, let's dive into the different monitoring. First of all, let's define monitoring. When we talk about security, when we say monitoring, we usually refer to collecting logs. This is the traditional monitoring. This is usually what we had. We used to collect logs from different applications and services and infrastructure tools, and then we used to aggregate them and correlate them and try to get insights from those logs. The problem is, log is a very bad way to understand what is going on in your environment. Log can tell you that something has changed. It will not tell you what was before. It will not tell you what was after. And it will not tell you what this change means and what is the risk that this change is opening to you guys. So we do collect logs. We invest heavily in forensics and logs and stuff like this. But in cloud environment, this is not the first thing that I'm looking at when I talk about monitoring. Cloud environments are mostly software-based, and every configuration item is collectible, readable, and you can collect it and analyze it. So basically, I can ask questions about the configuration. For instance, how many users I have without MFA, without multi-factor authentication, and can ask the environment questions like, when was the what type of files do I have in my storage? Or what do they contain? Or what type of configuration does my storage have in order to allow external access? So instead of analyzing log, I can simply ask questions like, which user does have an MFA, or which user didn't use his permissions, or where do I have sensitive files? It's a very different way of looking at monitoring than analyzing logs. This way of the way of analyzing configuration and getting insights from the configuration, it's called posture management. Posture is basically the posture of your security. So there is a big number of tools that fall under the category of posture management. And what I'm going to do with in next slides is overview those different tools. Again, starting from IaaS, which is not the topic, so I'm going to run fast on those guys. And then we're going to dive into more SaaS monitoring, which you already mentioned the acronym for that, which is SSPM. So the first family of products that I want to talk about is what it's now called CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. I'm sorry, I'm going to use a lot of acronyms in this slide, not because I like for letters acronyms. It's because this is what the market is currently using. And it's better to understand those acronyms in order to understand what the vendors are talking about. So our journey starts with the most traditional and the most the most foundational product, which is CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. Cloud Security Posture Management connects to your infrastructure and platform as a service. It gathers information and detects misconfiguration. Misconfiguration is the biggest attack vector in cloud environment. Most of the attack is because you misconfigure the service and then you open a security breach. CSPM is basically a tool that can help you identify those misconfiguration by reading the configuration, comparing it to a list of controls. For instance, the CSPM can know different controls from different standards like ISO 271, and then give you some kind of score on your compliance. CSPM is also heavily integrated with workload protection, CWPP. This is why Gartner united those two categories under Cloud Native Application Protector Platform, CNAPP. But I'm still listing the old name as well because some of the market vendors are still using them. CWPP is basically checking the configuration, vulnerabilities, and patches on your workloads. Workloads are virtual machines, containers, serverless applications. Those are different workloads. So CWPP together with CSPM gives you visibility, monitoring, and detecting configuration and vulnerabilities inside your IaaS infrastructure service, platform service. And known vendors in this area is Wiz, Orca, Palo Alto with Prisma, and other vendors you might have heard about. I'm moving on because, again, we are more focusing on SaaS today and not the CSPM. ASPM is also relevant for infrastructure and platform and service. It's the newest member to the family of the posture management. Fastly mentioning what we do on infrastructure and service and platform and service, we develop application. This is what we do. ASPM goal is to manage the life cycle of the security in those development process. For instance, when do I, and how do I do security testing on my code? What is the right moment? How do I verify that all code is passing those security tools? How do I make sure that nobody is injecting code into my code repository without being allowed to? All those questions of application security is usually managed by the ASPM. He handles the CI/CD pipelines, the different security checks. And again, this is the newest member in this family. You guys might have encountered CyberSecurity acquired by Palo Alto, or Enso that was acquired by SNCC. And moving on again, because we're focusing on SaaS, and the ASPM is mostly for infrastructure and platform as a service. The SPM is currently, I think, the hottest. I think it's the second hottest today. But many acquisitions in the last year were around DSPM. DSPM basically inspects your data. It can tell you, for instance, that you have certain files with credit card numbers or other PII options in your OneDrive or your object storage. Usually, DSPM vendors are either focusing on infrastructure platform as a service, then they analyze object storage, databases, different type of data. Some of the vendors are more focused on on software as a service, and then they do look at all your Google Drive files, the files that you save on your Salesforce, OneDrive, and SharePoint, and stuff like this. And the idea is that they can give you insights to what your data is and adhere to different regulations and privacy laws. DSPM is a bit of a niche, and some of the larger vendors of the scene saying that DSPM is part of their offering as well, but there are also some vendors that offer this offering specifically. Last year, I think we saw Polar Security acquired, and there's another one that was acquired very recently, but I don't remember the details. And I'm moving on to the thing that we gathered here to talk about. So as I said, software as a service is a very big organization. Every enterprise will have tens, if not hundreds, of SaaS providers. The biggest challenge here is that you have limited visibility, already mentioned. You are dependent on the cloud provider, and some of the vendors are good, they give you good tools, and some of them are not that mature, and you need to work on other mitigating controls or compensating controls for your data. The technologies that can help you in analyzing software as a service, posture management, or to analyze misconfiguration, to analyze compliance breaches, and security risk is called SSPM, SaaS Security Posture Management. In the past, we used to, a couple of years ago, we used to have a CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers. SSPM is the next generation of those tools, and they are more focusing. CASB was more focused on access, while SSPM is more focusing on the actual configuration and also looking at wider angles of the SaaS offering, like for instance, different file types and stuff that you install inside your SaaS.
And it's also
Sorry, yeah, Gidi.
It's also worth mentioning that CASBs usually work like proxies, while SSPMs are working completely. Oh, they might do some of this as well, but most of them, I think at Reco as well, in this case, are using APIs mainly to do those things.
Great comment, because we're also talking about this in the next slide. What important capabilities you need to integrate to your SSPM? So first of all, as I said, you will have tens of SaaS services in your environment, probably. So your SSPM needs to be compatible with most of the services that you need to integrate with. So the wider the list that the cloud provider gives you, the SSPM vendor gives you, the bigger the list that of tools, of services you support, then probably you will find what you need over there. Okay, of course, most of the SSPM supports the biggest like Salesforce and G Suite. But again, you will also have some of the smaller services, and you need to check if the SSPM support them as well. It gives you visibility into what is going on, sometimes better visibility, sometimes even visibility you are lacking in this environment. They give you automated, the ability to automate things, and of course, further analysis. And I think Ofer mentioned this very good, so I'm not going to do this in details. Basically, different SSPMs present different features, but I would say that most of them have e-discovery and classification. E-discovery, okay, let's check your files and see where do you have, for instance, PII, where do you have a project name, for instance, that could be confidential and you don't want to be exposed, and then classify them. For the classification is very much required for later analysis. And some of them can give you a log analysis or ability to produce insights that are that are dependent on the logs coming from the provider. And it's very important to integrate them with additional technologies. For this matter, I produced this slide that talks about how SaaS security architecture should look like. Now, this is like the holy grail of SaaS security. Not all organization needs to implement all of this, and not all organizations need to implement, and not all of them implementing all of this. But I gave you basically the highlights, and you need to pick and choose what you implement to your environment. So Tal already mentioned on the right, we have the identity provider. This is a big cornerstone in SaaS security. Sorry, Ofer mentioned it, not Tal. As Ofer said, for instance, discovery of new SaaS application, the IDP is the best way to do that, because usually all SaaS application will go through the IDP for single sign-on and identity federation. This is a centralized place to check logs. For instance, I want to look for brute force. I want to look for malicious authentication attempts. This is one single point that I'm looking at all the logs. I don't have to go to each SaaS service to do so, because everything will be IDP. This is also the place to enforce my preventative controls. For instance, conditional access. You cannot log in unless you have a certified machine and on antivirus that is updated. This is where I enforce multi-factor authentication on honest variation. This is where I also, some of the IDPs have the capabilities to manage your endpoints, to make sure that you're also accessing with the proper authentication, but also with the proper hygiene for your endpoint. So those are all parts of the IDP, and it's a major foundation in your SaaS security. Known IDPs, Azure Active Directory, what else? Okta, OneLogin, Bing Identity. Those are all Google Workspaces. Those are all examples for known IDP. An IDP allows you to maintain identity federation. Identity federation is the tool that helps you to control all your users, both authentication, but also authorization, because you can use the IDP. For instance, you map a certain user to a group in the Active Directory, it can map to a role in Salesforce or in AWS, so it also helps you to manage your authorizations. On the bottom, you see the organizational network, or sometimes people work from home, sometimes people work from shared offices or from the network. The way that they access the SaaS service can be made through secure browsing, new technology today, which also integrates nicely with SSPM and also SaaS. In a moment I will explain SaaS, but also integrates nicely. Secure browsing gives you a good solution for managing internet risk. For instance, they are able to enforce policy on browser, make sure that when you access a secure server, phishing attempts or poisoning of the data is there's less chances to succeed because of the secure browsing. Usually when we access the SaaS service, in an organization today implement something that is called SSE, or software-defined networking for their branches, or SASE, or Zero Trust Network Access. Those are all technologies that help you to access the internet safely. We used to have all those technologies in our perimeter on our firewall that is in outside the organization. But since people today have started the perimeter broken, people are working from everywhere, SASE and /ZTNA provide better access capability to different services. Well, I will not be elaborating on this because this is not the topic today. Our topic is what's on the left. And this is the SSPM that is used to monitoring. This is the third thing on top of the access and the identity that I want to implement. As Gidi was mentioning, SSPM usually connect to via API access to the SaaS service. It means that the SaaS provider needs to build this API. So we're always dependent on the SaaS provider to build an API, to allow access to that, to bring the relevant data to this API. And as Gidi was mentioned, usually CASB was more of a inline, and SSPM is taking more of the API access approach. There are pros and cons for each approach, but I think the market has said clearly API access is much more preferable over inline access. So the SSPM for API gets all the data. It also has access to the identity provider. I was too lazy to draw the arrow over there, but it also has access to the IDP in order to analyze the logs. Actually, for the SSPM, the IDP is another software as a service that it needs to manage. And this is a good place to also to connect my SIEM, Security Information Manager, or in the cloud, we have this new technologies, cloud detection and response, identity threat and detection. We have all those new acronyms that I was too lazy to put on screen. But because SSPM can gather insights from different SaaS services, it can also digest and make sure that those events are real. There is a big advantage into connecting your log connection, your CDR, your SIEM directly to the SSPM, especially because most SaaS services don't produce good logs. The logs are very hard to parse. Also, some of them are the logs required heavier licensing. I think Ofer was mentioning Salesforce Shield, which give you better logging, but it requires double the money on the licenses fee. So this is why SSPM can give us additional benefits on top of this. So this is an example. This is the this is an example for an architecture of SaaS. Sorry, I'm reading the questions as we speak. This is an example for SaaS architecture. I'm not sure that every organization need to adopt all of the components here, but yeah, definitely the biggest building blocks are there, and most organizations will adopt them probably. Now this is time for answering the questions. Yeah, it will give us a couple more minutes. So just to summarize before I move into the to see if different type of questions. So cloud monitoring is not only about logs. Logs has an important role, yeah? It's important for forensics. Sometimes you only have logs, but it's also about posture management, which is mean reading the configuration and tell you, this is what you're doing wrong. This is breaking compliance. This is where you can adjust your settings and be more secure. Posture management is very different if we're talking infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, then we're talking CSPM, CWPP, ASPM, or if we're talking software as a service, which is mostly SSPM. SSPM is the biggest building block, and it needs to work together with your IDP, with your secure browsing / zero trust network access on all those different tools that you give to access. Remember, in software as a service, you have 3 responsibilities: the data, identity and access management, managing the roles, setting up authentication, and auditing and monitoring. In the shared responsibility model, this is always your responsibility. So IDP for the identities and SSPM for the data and the auditing and monitoring, those tools will cover this. Regarding the questions,
Vlad asks, and basically that one is the constant argue about CASB or SSPM or both of them. So you mentioned that API is the preferred method for connecting or integrating with all the SaaS platforms, the SSPM to the SaaS platforms, which is the next gen way or the new way, the updated way. What about the prevention? So once you're no longer in line, how do you prevent?
Okay, so let's focus on first of all on the different terms. CASB was also going into 2 ways. Some of the CASB were API based, and some of the CASB were inlines, proxies, inline proxies. It's not true that CASB was. So basically, let's elaborate on this. Inline and API based has a couple of pros and cons. Let's review them quickly. So API based is let's start with inline. Inline can be preventative. In API based, usually you read only the configuration. If you need to do something in the environment, you go and you do it on your own. It's not something that is blocking. It's not something that is changing configuration. So you are correct that API based when you do API based, you basically don't do blocking, or you do the blocking slower. It's not mandatory, but usually this is what happens. On the other hand, when you have proxy, everything, when you're inline, everything has to go through this inline proxy, which create operational challenges. How do you make sure you have one user at home, you have one user abroad? How do you make everybody go through a one reverse proxy? This is one challenge. Second challenge is sometimes proxy can miss things, okay? For instance, let's say I'm implementing my proxy today. He will not know what files I have on my Google Drive. He will not know that I have PI either, because proxy only looking at the traffic. So there are pros and cons to both approaches. And I didn't say that API is the preferable method. I said that the market said his word. For a lot of time, we thought about, okay, we don't know who will win. We don't know where the market is going, but it's definitely the market says we don't like the operational burden of having inline proxies, and we prefer API-based. We prefer to sleep quietly at night, knowing that if the SPBN is down, nothing will happen. You think about it in inline, when the tool is down, no traffic. Okay, so we prefer to sleep quietly at night and live without prevention, only to do this API based. But you are correct that prevention is a challenge, Gilad, and I have no answer to that unless Reco will come with some kind of a solution to be both API-based and to do faster prevention.
So in a way, there is something in the middle. You mentioned before the architecture that, the typical, the ideal architecture would be with a SaaS or SSC or SASC in the middle. Or we can also call it the next-gen VPN. And many of them has built-in or inline CASB or inline proxy. But again, I think that was one of the main challenges with CASB is that most of the common CASBs back then, and I saw it till that day as well, we're covering only the core system. So the Salesforce of the world, the GitHubs of the world, the main platforms, not the smallest one. So yes, on one side, it allowed prevention. On the other side, it prevented only things or only issues on the main things, which is usually something that handles the internal threat, the insider threat, which is the employees. And with SSPMs, we moved also to things that are happening that are not related to the internal threat. And so maybe the ideal architecture of using SaaS plus SSPM also can provide prevention and inline protection or prevention for the platforms, but again, only for certain platforms, only for the main platforms, not for all of them. So Gilad, hopefully that was answering your question.
Josh also asked how SaaS control access to SaaS application. Well, different implementation for SaaS, but in all implementation, the traffic goes through some kind of a SaaS edge. Either you have a client on your laptop that sends you into a SaaS server, or you have the SaaS connected to your VPN/perimeter. So anyway, the traffic goes to the SaaS, and now you decide, for instance, that in 2 a.m., the users cannot connect to Office 365, but they can work on Salesforce, for instance. So it's up to you, basically, the perimeter of the different the different policies. But the idea is that all the traffic goes through the SaaS, either by an agent or by some kind of a VPN or a private line. Thank you, Avner, for your comments.
Excellent. So